That is the big story that we're talking about this evening. It is the year 2017, and for many of us, including me and you, the ability to drive a car seems like something that one can't even spend too much time thinking about. And that's why I ask you to forget for a second that it is the year 2017, because that is what you need to be prepared for when you learn about the sort of restrictions that are in place for many women in Saudi Arabia. Driving a car is only one among many. However, let's not go too far. This is a landmark judgment. Saudi Arabia was the only country till yesterday in the world that prevented or banned its women from driving. But the Saudi king has chosen to do away with that restriction. Remember, Saudi Arabia has been in the grip of many changes over the past couple of years. Many came into play while the old king was still alive. Many still have taken place under the reign of the new king. And a lot's also been talked about the new crown prince, the 32-year-old Mohammed bin Salman, who is considered the agent of change, if you will, in Saudi Arabia. But is it too little and too late? Is 2017 really the year one should be talking about the right for women to drive in? Remember, many women have tried to break out of the shackles of this provision over the last 25 years. The first attempts at driving by Saudi women and Kuwaiti women date back to 1990. This was, of course, circa the first Gulf War, when Saudi Arabia had many other issues to confront. However, Saudi women put that aside. They decided to challenge this law even back then, and it has borne fruit now in 2017. The Saudi king has ordered that women be allowed to drive cars in the country. This ends the conservative Islamic kingdom's status as the only country where it was forbidden. The royal decree has ordered the formation of a ministerial body to give advice within 30 days and implement the order by June 2018. Saudi Arabia has been widely criticized for being the only country in the world that bans women from driving.
A royal decree has been issued in Saudi Arabia giving women the right to drive. This is a historic day for Saudi society, for men and women, and we can now say at last.
The United States has welcomed the Saudi king's order allowing its women to drive cars.
Well, then we're happy. We're happy. We're certainly happy to hear that. If Saudi women are now able to drive, certainly here in the United States, we would certainly welcome that. And so I think it's a great step in the right direction for that country.
The White House also released a statement welcoming the move. It described it as a positive step towards promoting the rights and opportunities of women in Saudi Arabia. The White House said, and I quote, "We will continue to support Saudi Arabia in its efforts to strengthen Saudi society and the economy through reforms like this and the implementation of Saudi Vision 2030, end quote. Manal al-Sharif, one of the first Saudi women who spoke up against the ban in recent times, has also welcomed that decision. In May 2011, she filmed herself while driving a car in the kingdom as a mark of protest. She was arrested and was imprisoned for 9 days. Saudi Arabia's latest move comes as an effort to improve the image and the perception of its human rights record. Now, just recently, women were allowed to attend the Saudi National Day celebrations in a stadium on August 2nd. The Saudi government announced the construction of a luxury beach resort where women will be allowed to wear bikinis in September. The ban on internet calls was lifted. All of this after the Saudi new crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who has presented himself as a modernizer, promised reforms in all fields except politics. To talk more about that story, I'm joined from Jerusalem by Holly Dagres, a senior journalist and columnist. Good evening, Holly. Thanks so much for speaking with us here at Wion. Let's just have you start by reacting to this news of Saudi Arabia doing away with this archaic law. It was the only country in the world that prevented its women from driving.
Well, it's wonderful news coming out of Saudi Arabia to hear that women will also be driving and joining the rest of the women of the world. At the same time, it's very interesting to note that a lot of people have misunderstood this as an Islamic law, where in fact this is actually something that's rooted in Saudi tradition. And interesting enough, a lot of people have been speaking out against that and saying that, yes, this has nothing to do with Islam at all. And it's interesting to note that in the time of the Prophet, women were actually allowed to ride camels. So it just goes to show that how this law is actually not relevant at all and has no root in Saudi society whatsoever.
Absolutely, and it's interesting you say that because, even this new law has to be done in accordance with the Sharia recommendations. That is what the decree says. Do you think that opens up questions on what might be permitted, might not be permitted? For instance, hours of the day that women are allowed to drive, whether or not they need to have a male companion with them while they're out driving in the kingdom. Do you think those specifics are still to come out, and that will open up a whole other realm of conversation?
I think you bring up a good point. It's rather complicated because, yes, they've issued this decree, but here's the Saudi monarchy was saying that the ulama had to be the ones that decide this stuff. And overnight, they just came out with this decree. And I think there are probably a lot of Saudi clerics scratching their heads and saying, well, where's this coming from and why is this happening? Because we've had men in the past say, Saudi clerics in the past say that, yeah, driving is bad for women's ovaries and women shouldn't drive because they have a quarter of the brain of a man and that sort of thing. So I think there's going to be a lot of backlash, and there may or may not be some like rules and whatnot being implemented. So there's going to be a lot of we're going to have to read the fine print, I would say, and see where the Saudi government goes with this.
Sure. Stay with me, Holly. I'm also joined on the broadcast by Talmiz Ahmed. He's India's former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Iran. Good evening, sir. Thanks for speaking with us again. I don't want to play the devil's advocate, but I feel like I'm forced to. This is, of course, a path-breaking decision by Saudi Arabia. You've served there. You know the restrictions that the society imposes on women. Do you think that this has come as too little, too soon, too late, I should say?
Saudi Arabia has been a pariah nation in this regard for several decades. Every time anyone wanted to make a negative remark about the kingdom, they would also, at that time they would speak about the fact that women cannot drive. So this was synonymous with something negative and something seriously wrong with the kingdom. In that sense, this is a very important decision. It brings the country on the step towards normalcy, because it is a very unique country. It is founded on a very rigid Islamic doctrine, Wahhabiyya, and it enforces on the basis of Wahhabiyya some very, very rigid tenets in terms of personal conduct, modesty of attire, gender segregation, restrictions on the movement of women, the compulsory guardianship of all women. All of these are very, very onerous conditions as far as women are concerned.
Yes.
I think it is a welcome decision, but obviously it has a very long way to go.
Absolutely. And sir, if I can also ask you, a lot has been talked about the fact that the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, he's been the agent of change, so to speak. We've seen women being allowed into the National Stadium for the first time in the country's more than 80-year history. Is that a fair assessment? Do you think it is really the 32-year-old Crown Prince that has sort of set the wheels in motion?
See, let us be very clear about it. Nothing in the kingdom is simple and straightforward. Yes, you do have a Crown Prince who is 31 years old. His father is about 80 years old. So he's in line for the throne and could take over at some stage fairly quickly and could be in power, if all goes well, for several decades. He is projecting himself as the agent of change. He's attempting to reach out to the younger generation of his country and has been talking about national transformation, and he has associated with himself a vision 2030, in terms of which he wants to significantly change the economic order in the country. But do also take into account the fact that in order to reach his present position, two crown princes before him were ignominiously removed from their position. At the same time, the crown prince is associated with two extremely bloody and extremely unsuccessful conflicts in Syria and Yemen, and is now associated with a confrontation with Qatar. These are going nowhere. So obviously he must have felt the need to do something dramatic so as to divert attention from all these setbacks that he has engineered for his country.
Sure. Holly, this is only one of many of the restrictions that Saudi women face on a day-to-day. Male guardianship is one such thing. The inability to interact with the members of the opposite sex if they're not relatives is another. There's also restrictions on the kind of sports Saudi women can play. Do you feel, Holly, that after today's decision, or I should say yesterday's decision, that this has also opened up this space for more conversation about making Saudi Arabia perhaps a more permissive society for women's rights in the 21st century?
Absolutely. And I think that what we just saw happen in the past 24 hours is going to give Saudi women more reason to push the boundaries furthermore. And women's rights activists won't be focusing on driving. Now they'll be focusing other angles. And they're going to be using this as more reason to push the envelope on their country. And I think that's great to hear.
All right. One last question, Ambassador Ahmed, for you. Do you think that the driving part of it was really the most simple of the restrictions to be dealt with at this point in time? But when it comes to questions of guardianship, when it comes to questions of interaction with the opposite sex, those are really going to be the tough ones for the kingdom to handle?
I think all of this is going to be extremely difficult. They have only announced a new decree. We have a long way to go. The implementation of this is going to be extremely difficult. First, the women will have to be taught how to drive. Number one, they will have to obtain licenses. They will then have to be respected on the road. And all of this is going to be extremely onerous. Do recall that even now, as we speak, there is a very powerful opposition as well. And certain clergymen have had to be sacked from their posts. And there is a media war going on, a social media war on this subject. And some of the zealots have said some extremely abusive and very, very obnoxious things. Then we have various other issues. We have a long way to go there. It is a conservative society. It is a traditional society. And, you know, what you are referring to, engagement or interaction between men and women, free movement of women, employment of women, all of these are going to be very, very difficult. And we will have to watch the scenario with keen interest. I do believe that the kingdom has taken the first step in moving forward into the 21st century, but it has a very long way to go.
All right, we'll leave it at that. You brought up a very interesting point, and that is whether the environment is going to be able to accept this change wholeheartedly as well. We'll have to wait and watch as to what the outcomes of this landmark decision will be, but we'll leave it at that. Holly and Ambassador Ahmed, thank you both for being with us on the broadcast and sharing your thoughts with us on this extremely important story for women in the 21st century.